Well, Ian Paisley Jr. chairs the Agriculture Committee and he's with me now. The Minister learned about it via the news, RTE. That doesn't really seem good enough, and in fact, essentially what your report says is communication was the key problem here.
Yes, I think this is a very important report. A lot of Assembly reports, I think, end up on the shelves and gather dust. Anyone who's interested in the industry and ensuring that indeed political relationships between this jurisdiction and the jurisdiction in the Republic of Ireland actually work properly as good neighbours should read this report, because it sets out in a practical way how that relationship failed, and it sets out how the Republic of Ireland literally for 10 days knew they had a crisis, addressed that crisis, were able to protect their market share, their prices, and didn't communicate with our department, the equivalent here, and left us to swing in the wind when it came to December 2008 and it was announced that there was a dioxin contamination incident going on with our pig sector. I believe this report identifies that, identifies where the breakdown occurred. It points the finger at the Republic of Ireland and says you're guilty here. And it sets out a strategy and a plan as to how to put that right so as it doesn't happen again. But I tell you, once this has happened once, and we've lost £15 million worth of industry, we've lost consumer confidence to a degree as well. Once that happens once, it's very, very difficult to rebuild that.
So how do you rebuild it then? What are the practical actions that you're recommending? Well,
I think the first thing is, I say this without being committee chairman, we look after ourselves. We look after our own industry. I think number one has to be number one. Putting back my committee hat back on, I would say very, very strongly there has to be proper communication between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. There has to be a proper sharing of information at a practical level. You can't hold anything back when it comes to sharing that information. And I think importantly we must have one single person who becomes responsible for, say, a contamination outbreak here in Northern Ireland. We had the spectacle of both the Health Minister and the Agriculture Minister making separate statements and taking questions on this issue. Now, I understand their unique areas of responsibility, but housewife out there, consumer out there, pig farmer out there was at a loss as to who was really in charge, and that we needed to have, and we've identified that there must be, when there's an incident like this, someone where the buck stops and where they become in charge of the incident and drive the incident.
But given the fact that you've looked at this in detail, you weren't able then to find anything to pin on the Minister herself. She did a reasonable job?
Well, our job is not about finding things to pin on the Minister. Our job was about examining totally and clearly the evidence, distilling that evidence and saying, is there someone to blame? And this report does blame. This report blames the Ministry of Food in the Republic of Ireland. It blames 4 ministers who sat around a table in Dublin, including the Children Minister, the Health Minister, Agriculture Minister and the Taoiseach, and discussed how they would save their industry and stuff Northern Ireland's industry, when they ought to and had a responsibility to pick up the phone and speak minister to minister about what was going to happen. Now, if Michelle Gildernew was guilty of something in this, I'd be the first to point the finger at her. Michelle Gildernew was left swinging in the wind by her counterparts in the Republic of Ireland. That's what was wrong, and we should identify that. And I said in the debate, when Northern Ireland speaks with one voice and a unified voice, people tremble. When we have a divided voice, it fails. We spoke with a united voice today, and I think that the Republic of Ireland was seen for what it was. They looked after their own market and looked after themselves.
Do you think anything will change down in Dublin now after this particular report? I think you had some sort of difficulties even getting the officials to give evidence at various stages to you, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we travelled to Dublin as a committee to take evidence, and we were about 50 yards away from the Ministry of Food and Fisheries, and they couldn't find their way across the road to give evidence to us. Several weeks later, they, however, were able to travel to Belfast to give that evidence. I think the reason why they ended up coming to Belfast was because they were incredibly embarrassed at the cack-handed way in which they'd handled that evidence session in Dublin. I think they have to recognise that when this committee is trying to protect and trying to look at problems within its industry, it must respond to them, because it makes complete nonsense out of good neighbourly relationships, which is what we're supposed to be about. Practical, good, sensible cooperation. It makes complete nonsense out of that if, when it comes to basic communication about a problem in the Republic of Ireland, it can't be communicated to Northern Ireland.
And whilst on one level this is a non-political issue, one has to say there's a contrast here between those previous crises, we think of foot and mouth, where the Minister was quite quick to put in place the old Fortress Island kind of notion, and this one where you as a Unionist, you know, relatively ready to point the finger of blame at Dublin.
Well, I suppose me as a unionist pointing the finger blame at Dublin isn't anything unique in that.
Exactly.
But I do believe that there have been other times whenever information has come our way in Northern Ireland, it's just not in agriculture, and we've willingly shared that. Willingly shared it in terms of paedophiles and sex abusers. We've willingly shared that information in terms of police jurisdictional issues. We've willingly shared it in terms of crime. We've willingly shared it in terms of whether there's been a food issue and a farming issue. I think what we expect from our neighbour is equal and decent cooperation, and that's what we didn't get, and as a result our industry, our pig industry, did suffer. Now I hope we can, and believe we have, recaptured some of those markets, but there still are some people out there, some farmers, some processors, who have lost hundreds of thousands of pounds, and they should be given that money back. And indeed, if that money is coming from Europe, then the Republic of Ireland should be seeing to it that that money does come back to Northern Ireland.
Okay. Ian Paisley Jr., many thanks indeed.